Thank you very much. Now we'd like to start the panel discussion 2, State-of-the-Art Technology from Silicon Valley to Accelerate DX. From Incubate Fund, General Partner, Mr. Paul Mclnerney is the moderator. And from B Capital Group, GP, Karen Page is here. And also Quinn Lee is here as well from Qualcomm Ventures, SVP and Global Head of Quinn Qualcomm.
Excited to be here today to moderate this session on Silicon Valley perspectives on the future of enterprise technology. Delighted to have our two guests, Karen and Quinn, here today. Karen, to my left, is a general partner at B Capital Group's Ascend Fund, which focuses on early stage startups. Prior to that, Karen had quite a career at both Apple and then as one of the founding executive members of the team at Box. We also have Quinn here today, who is Senior Vice President and Global Head of Qualcomm Ventures. Quinn has had an extensive career in hardcore deep tech, including Broadcom and Lucent and IBM. And we're delighted to have you both here today. I think we'll kick things off with a short presentation from Karen.
Thank you. As Paul mentioned, I am with B Capital Group. We are a multinational global fund investing across all stages, from early stage to growth. We focus on technology and healthcare and work very, very closely with energetic entrepreneurs around the globe to help them grow and scale their companies into transformative, world-changing businesses. We were founded in 2015 by Eduardo Saverin, who was one of the early founders of Facebook, Raj Ganguly, and Howard Morgan, who was one of the most successful early stage investors of our time. And we have over $6 billion under management and 110 people on our team, with over 165 companies currently in our portfolio, operating out of 9 cities across the world. We're also partnered with the Boston Consulting Group, which gives us incredible insights and advantages to help our portfolio companies with some of the most strategic minds in business to help them grow and work on various strategies to become global corporations. In addition, we have an integrated platform. We work together with all of our partners across our funds to grow our companies from very small companies to global institutions over time, with a differentiated value add that includes BCG, as I mentioned. But in addition to that, some of the insights from the investors on our teams that have deep experience in growing companies from the founder's perspective. It's a multi-stage platform, and so we work together with founders and entrepreneurs from all the different markets across the globe to find and identify those opportunities very early, and then invest in them all the way through an outcome, whether it's an IPO or an acquisition. We take a very differentiated approach. We've been operating out of the markets that we've been in with deep expertise for years and years. So many times we see founders that start multiple companies. And so our networks are broad and robust, which brings a lot of perspective to the entire ecosystem. Our key sectors of focus include enterprise technologies, fintech, healthcare, the data stack, and security. As well as a few opportunistic views that include quantum computing and deep science. To introduce myself, my name is Karen Page. I'm based in the Bay Area. I've lived there for over 20 years. I've been with B Capital for almost 5 years and have invested across our growth stage companies, as well as my current focus on our early stage team. I was an operator for many, many years, working with companies like Box.com and Apple to help grow their foundation across enterprise technologies from the product go-to-market perspective, and have been on multiple boards, and I'm very, very excited to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Karen. Really look forward to hearing more of your experiences as we get into the session. I'd like to also invite Quinn to talk a little bit about Qualcomm Ventures.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thanks again for the opportunity to be here. Very excited to be here today. And thanks Rob and the Will team for inviting me. So I just want to talk a little bit about Qualcomm history and also touch about Qualcomm Ventures. So many of you in the audience may know about Qualcomm. We're a company based in San Diego, California. We're probably best known for inventing the CDMA technology, which is a wireless communications technology that powered many of the phones. Early days was feature phones. In fact, one of the first CDMA network was launched in Japan many years ago. And so we developed technology, the CDMA technology, that drastically improved the performance and the capacity of the wireless network. And then later, we developed also the technology that powered the smartphone industry. So the processor technologies and communications technologies that also Ben Horowitz had mentioned earlier. The phone that's in your pocket today, a lot of technology inside is developed by Qualcomm. And so we were able to connect many folks around the world to the internet and put a little computer in your pocket. And now today, we're taking all these technologies developed for the smartphone industry and apply them across other industry verticals like automotive, like robotics, like industrial IoT. So the underlying technology that Qualcomm has developed really takes a couple of key characteristics. One is really high performance, low power CPU, GPU technologies that allows all these technology to be able to embed it in a phone without the phone overheating. So you can have the phone be connected to the internet all the time, be able to do social media applications, other things, and where the battery can still last a day or maybe 2 days. And then the other technology we have developed is really connectivity technology. So both on the cellular technology front as well as Wi-Fi and Bluetooth technology. And then one of the things that we have embedded in a processor is also called a neural network processor, which allows the embedded processor to do certain AI applications, also on device. And we believe on-device AI processing is important. Many of the AI processing will be done in the cloud, but a lot of the application will be done on device. And on-device AI use case has advantages being that it's being more private, that's done on device. You can use less the network bandwidth to transfer the data to the cloud. And also there's securities, where things are being done locally on the device. So these are the technologies we've built, the fundamental technologies, and we're applying these technology across industry verticals, smartphone being one, and automotive, connected IoT devices, and other things. So we call it, we're powering the connected intelligent edge. And at Qualcomm Ventures, which is the group I'm heading, we're investing in innovative startups, in entrepreneurs across the globe, in companies that can leverage the technology we've built at Qualcomm to help us expand our ecosystem of partners and customers. So the group has been around for 23 years. We're currently managing a portfolio of about $2 billion. We're invested in 7 different geographical locations around the world, and we have currently 150 plus active portfolio companies. We're also very fortunate. We've worked with many successful entrepreneurs in our ecosystem, so we have had some good success. 18 of the unicorn exit in the last 7 years was reached the unicorn level. Companies like Zoom, which is a very successful company, many of you know. Companies like Xiaomi, that's a handset OEM in China. And in enterprise space, we've invested in companies like Cloudflare and SentinelOne, which is a cybersecurity company. Some of the areas that we focused on as a team, a lot of it is related to Qualcomm's ecosystem in areas like 5G, AI I talked about, in particular on-device AI, IoT. IoT is being impacted by a variety of technologies, and we're invested in connected homes, connected enterprises, a variety of IoT technologies, as well as enterprise. I think this panel is about enterprise, so we're interested in edge computing, security, and on-device AI. Here's a snapshot of some of the companies we invested in across the globe in these various sectors we're involved in. It's a pleasure to be here today. Looking forward to the panel session and look forward to meeting many of you in the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Quinn. So eager to jump in. Obviously, enterprise tech is a very broad space, so I'd like to take it a chunk at a time. First place I'd like to start is if you look at the history of sort of VC in Japan and startups in Japan going global, there's still a fairly limited set of success cases. Given both of your experience with a very global purview, you mentioned CDM in Japan. I'm sure that the experience at Box was a very rich one. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you observe of companies that have come from a given domestic market and successfully gone global. What sort of commonality you've seen in those companies? Karen, I don't know if you want to talk to your experience at Box, perhaps.
Absolutely. I think one of the fundamental considerations is to think about globalization very early, because there are fundamental platform considerations as you think about starting your company in general. But when you think about going global, you need to consider having a foundation built upon ease of language translation and the ability to push updates, which many SaaS companies push updates daily or weekly, and you've got to be prepared to do that across multiple languages and geographies. And if you haven't thought about that from the very early days, it's quite a challenge. It was one of the areas that I worked on. In fact, when I was at Box, I helped drive our expansion across many geographies, but including Japan, and spent some time here working on that. And it was extremely enlightening to see the needs of workers as they deploy technologies. And I think consideration for a foundation that supports that early, as well as a deep understanding of the requirements as you scale, is fundamental to success.
So the architecture, but also probably just as importantly, the use cases at the end user level.
Absolutely.
Right. Quinn, more from a sort of I guess your background is more in sort of hardware, in a sort of deep tech. I'm curious as to what your experiences are there.
Yeah, so if you think about us, Qualcomm, we're a global telecommunications company. So even in the early days, I think we had very much of a global outlook of things. As we were developing early days of CDM technology, we recognized that these technology need to be standardized and needs to work across the globe in various regions around the world. So we really made an effort to work with operators. In Japan, we worked with the KDDI and Docomo and so forth to really make sure that as the network's rolling out, that the communication protocol is supported across the globe. In fact, one of the earlier CDMA networks is in Japan, as I mentioned earlier. In fact, one of the early CDMA handset was built in partnership with Sony. So we really had a global outlook of things because the industry we're in, and the standards needs to be supported across the globe by all different operators around the world. And if you look at today, we have very much of a global workforce, and we really have to adapt to make sure that whatever technology we develop, it fits the local market needs, whether it's in smartphones, whether it's in IoTs, whether it's automotives. Each region around the world have different requirements. So we really make sure that the technology we develop, we have local teams in these different countries and understand the local requirements and the local needs, and really work with the local partners to make sure that we develop the right technology that meets the market needs.
Right. So there's definitely themes around sort of thinking early, like from the get-go, sort of trying to architect to go global, and then I think both of you referenced this importance of understanding at the end user level in different geographies what really do they need and how do you adapt to that. Fascinating. Linked to that, I guess, in a way, there's a question too around the talent that comes with that. And just to provide a little bit of context for Japan, tech talent in Japan obviously Relative to the US, I think 3% of the US workforce is, what you might call digital talent. About 1% of the Japanese workforce is digital. And within that, in Japan, the tech talent tends to skew a little bit more to system integrators, so external collaborators and parties, as opposed to corporations. So the whole question around how you get as much leverage as you can out of the tech talent you'd have is a really important one. So I'm just curious, any thoughts you might have around how as an ecosystem, and you've got most of the sort of representatives of the ecosystem in Japan here in the room, how to think about that question of talent. Karen, any thoughts?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about that, having been in Silicon Valley now for well over 20 years. I think one of the drivers is the cultural mindset, as well as the ability to access incredible talent. So in Silicon Valley, one of the drivers of our engineering talent has been the schools, the educational systems that surround Silicon Valley. So Stanford and Berkeley are just two examples of many, where not only do students get a superb education in engineering, software engineering, but they're also learning about starting companies and creating an entrepreneurial spirit and mindset, and having resilience around risk, because obviously startups come with a high degree of risk, and you have to be able to be prepared for that. And so I think access to engineering talent is a critical driver for creating a successful ecosystem of startups, and the ability to have access to talent that understands how to think about the risk as well as the opportunity is one important factor.
That's fascinating. It feels like a real opportunity here in Japan as well, where the technical education is important, but just as important would be how do you build a mindset of like, okay, this is a kind of a risk that I want to take on, and what does it look like to start a company? Or
yeah, in Silicon Valley, one of our famous sayings is fail fast, where it's okay to try something and not succeed the first time, but to know what you're looking for, so you recognize when it's time to try something else. And I think that creates a good fundamental understanding. And we are, I think, in Silicon Valley, very excited when other markets around the world want to develop their own ecosystem for startups, and creating a mentality around some of those ideas that we just discussed is critically important. But one of the other fundamentals, I believe, of the ecosystem in Silicon Valley is our innate desire to collaborate and to share ideas, and to be open about what we're building, where we need help, and how we're imagining the future.
There's some great hints as we think about our own sort of ecosystem here in Japan. I think, so there's a great question there around how could the ecosystem engage in different ways with universities and talent as they come into the market. I think there's another question too about global leverage. So how do you build teams globally as well? I think, Quinn, your own experience, I guess, with having a truly global sort of, workforce across the different companies you've worked at would be of reference to.
Yeah, so engineering talent's really key for our company. At the core of the companies is engineers, right? We're developing the technology, whether it's wireless communication technologies or processor technologies, other things. Engineering talent is really critical. So as the company scales and grows, how do you manage that engineering talent becomes very critical. And you have, obviously, as Karen talked about, the Bay Area, there's a lot of good universities, produce a lot of good talent. But across the world, if you look at different areas, Japan, you have great universities here. India, a lot of IITs produce great talent. So we really are hiring across the globe in regions of excellence, I would say, of engineering talent. Now the key question comes back is, once you have this very diverse workforce, how do you manage across them, right? So with the technologies we have today, whether it's Zoom, which we've invested in, or Teams, I think the collaborations become more real-time, becomes more close. And if you have local leaders in these different geographical locations, can manage a team locally and make sure the collaboration across the global engineering organizations really happens in the collaborative, in the real-time fashion, I think that's some of the keys that we're pushing for as an organization.
And building sort of those platforms of collaboration, then figuring out how culturally sort of across the different teams and geographies, how they collaborate. Yeah.
That's right.
Great. So now we've got aspirations for going global. You've got the talent that can support that. Curious then to deep dive a little bit on the themes. So what's driving sort of enterprise tech today, and what do you see the drivers to be? But also, as leaders, collectively, you have many leaders of these companies in the room, how they can also adapt to those trends.
I would say it's an incredibly interesting time. Enterprise technologies the market for enterprise technologies are still growing. So we're seeing globally 7% year-over-year growth, $3.5 trillion spend in enterprise purchasing. And in Japan, it's even larger. So there's a lot of growth and a lot of opportunity. So the question is, to your point, what's driving the growth and what are these buyers looking for? If you step back for a moment and look at what's happening in early stage and growth stage companies, it's been a tumultuous time. Over the recent year and a half, maybe, the sales cycles have been lengthening. So purchasers are taking longer to buy. Their decision-making processes are slower. So what drives that, and how do you overcome that if you are an entrepreneur with a technology you're trying to sell into an enterprise? And I think it really will come down to understanding what is important today to those buyers. We certainly have heard a lot about AI. B Capital has been investing in AI companies for years and years, but the infrastructure required to support the growth in AI technologies is going to be huge. Security around keeping your company safe as we expand to these new types of technologies is going to be critically important. And then some other fundamentals like expanding diversity and inclusion, being certain that you're both building sustainable companies, but that as an enterprise that you're working with companies who have sustainability at their core as well will also be very, very important. So I think for a startup today, you have to be concerned with how fast you can grow, with who you're selling to, what are those buying cycles like, how do you price appropriately, how do you position so that you are coordinating against the trends that are driving purchasing while being able to drive those cycles as fast as possible, as efficiently as possible, will be super important over the coming years.
I'm curious, Karen, you mentioned the sort of diversity piece, and as working with enterprises, especially if you have an aspiration to go global, what is the level of sort of sensitivity or attention to that whole area of like sustainability, ESG, diversity, in as far as an enterprise is actually making purchasing decisions? Do you see that as
It's a very complex question, and it comes from solutions or answers come with multiple lenses on. So enterprises who are building products have an imperative to build sustainably. Their investors and their shareholders are demanding it. So from that perspective, I'm sure Quinn could speak at length on that topic. So that's very important. It's important as you're beginning to build your company, as you're thinking about where you want to be in the world, in the universe. You have to begin with a sustainability framework. And then for me, as a venture investor, my LPs, I have a fiduciary responsibility to them to make sure that I am investing in sustainable organizations. And we do have a climate focus, and we do invest in companies that are helping both from a product perspective. So I've invested in a company called Overstory that is in the vegetation management space, helping to protect wildfires, which is a huge problem in today's society, and so that for me hits the mark of investing in sustainable companies that have an impact on the world and helping to keep everyone safe, and then to our LPs, they can see that we have a driver there.
So LP considerations, I guess, probably in Japan equally, but more so globally, there's certainly that fiduciary duty of ensuring that you're making investments in the right.
Absolutely. It's a huge topic of conversation, I believe, not only at B Capital, but across many organizations today.
Quinn, any thoughts as you look across sort of the overall tech environment around the drivers of enterprise technology?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So one is, as a technology company, we're developing a lot of the technology that could be leveraged by enterprises, whether it's 5G, whether it's IoT networks, whether it's AI technologies. We're building some of the fundamental technology that could be applied in manufacturing settings, automotives, other areas. So that's one thing we're building ourselves. But then we also, as a large corporation, consume a lot of enterprise technology. Given how diverse our company operates and the fact that engineering workforce is spread across the globe, we need collaboration tools across the company. We need efficient ways of IT infrastructure, right? We actually consume a lot of compute resources to design chips. Actually takes a lot of resources to design these chips. So we need to have data center capacities, either our own on-prem or in the cloud, to be able to support the engineering workload, essentially, right? So our IT organization actually works with a lot of companies in our ecosystem to figure out what's the right technology for our own use within Qualcomm Enterprise. And then on the venture front, we're also looking to invest in companies that could leverage the technology we're building to help us further expand the ecosystem. So that takes a variety of flavors. You know, Zoom's, I mentioned one that we invested a long time ago, and we were able to work with them, make sure their platform works across all sorts of devices, not just PC-centric, but on the phones, on tablets, and other things across enterprises. And then we invest other companies in cybersecurity, Karen, you talked about, which is another important area for us, both on the IoT device front as well as enterprise security. They both have to be, all these devices have to be very secure at the end of the day to be able to connect to the network and be able to operate in a very safe fashion.
Indeed. So I managed to get about 30 minutes into this session without saying AI, but I'm going to have to give in and talk about it. So just love to get both of your thoughts. I mean, obviously you see a whole swath of different companies. AI as an investment theme has been one that's been around for decades. But I'd love to get your thoughts on sort of AI, especially with a lens of, in an enterprise context. Within the enterprise, where are you seeing impact on different functions, be it marketing or supply chain or robotics or whatever it might be? I don't know, Quinn, would you like to talk a little bit about your own experience? I guess from a deep tech hardware perspective, where are you seeing the impact?
Yeah, I think Gen AI obviously is a very exciting area, but it's still pretty early days, I think. From our standpoint, this is not investment-wise, but just from a Qualcomm standpoint, we see a variety of use cases for it. So two areas I'll highlight. One is in software development, right? So you have tools like Copilot, and we invest in a company called Tab9, which is making tools to make the software development process more efficient, right? So it can suggest code that you should write, or if you say, I want to write a function like this, it can automatically generate this function for you. So it can make really the software development effort much, much more efficient using AI and Gen AI technology. The other area I would say we leverage AI for is in knowledge sharing or search within enterprise. A lot of the data that we have is proprietary to our enterprise, so we can't really send that data to ChatGPT or OpenAI. So we have to run models in the data that we have. So one area that we use it for is customer engineering. So basically, our customer calls us with questions on how do we use one of your devices, right? So the person on the other side be able to get access to that information very quickly. Maybe it's a question that's asked by an earlier customer or a different customer, but that information is stored in the enterprise system somewhere. So if we can get the AI system to run and to train on these models, and then the next question comes from another customer, you can easily search, say, how do we solve this problem, or what's the answer to this question? You'll be able to leverage all that knowledge that within the enterprise to be able to efficiently service needs of your customers.
Excellent. How about you, Karen? What are you seeing?
I think that the use cases are just unlocking now, and there will be such rapid transformation in how people access this new technology that will be yet to be seen. But I can say that early applications include across customer support, and having deep access to information that would have been extremely difficult to unlock previously, as well as legal. I think there's a huge use case for legal. I think that in healthcare, it's going to be unlocked. We have to be very careful today because there are still some hallucination issues and some other challenges that need to be addressed. But I think early indications are that there are multiple ways that AI will transform the way that people help people.
Indeed. Then within, again, the broader sort of context of enterprise tech, we tend to sort of, when you hear enterprise tech, you tend to immediately imagine software as a service or sort of the software side of it. I think, Quinn, we had an earlier conversation around the sort of real world, supply chain or robotics, and given Japan's sort of rich, built up, IP in the whole robotics and many of the mechatronics and other sort of, physical tech space, I'd be very curious to hear what you're seeing in terms of your own portfolio around enterprise tech as it relates to, supply chain in the physical world.
Sure. So I talked about on-device AI processing, right? So if you think about a robots is like a car, we call it like smartphone on wheels. If you think about the guts of a robot, a lot of the technology that we developed for the smartphones also can be used in robots. You need the CPUs, you need the GPUs, you need the computer vision technologies. The robots need to navigate to see where it goes, so forth. So we invest in some companies in robots. I think the use case, Paul, as you alluded to, in warehouse automations, certainly there's a shortage of laborers across the globe. So to be able to move things across the warehouse more efficiently, and some of those are pretty mundane tasks, right? From like items from a point where the items gets delivered to the warehouse to how it's stored on the shelves. Some of these tasks could be automated, done by robots. So we have an investment company called NVIA, it's based in the US, doing that. And then if you think about outside the warehouse, you have these forklifts in warehouse yards that's taking pallets from the big container trucks to the warehouse. And these forklift operations actually also requires skilled labor.
Right.
And it needs to operate ideally many hours during the day, right? So we have a company that's developing a technology that's basically putting an autonomous system on the robots, on a forklift, if you will. So the forklift can operate in a confined environment, in the yard and outside the warehouse, be able to go to the truck and pick up that pallet and be able to move that to the warehouse. So the technology is similar to what's in the autonomous vehicle, but it's a little bit more constrained environment. The forklifts are not moving at high speed. So it's probably a little bit easier problems to solve, but there are companies coming with all sorts of innovations to solve specific problems just for that operation, moving things around in warehouses.
Fascinating. You wouldn't want to get it wrong, though, with multiple tons on a pallet.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the precision is important. Obviously, there's still people there, so you can't run into people. Safety is important. Reliability is important. So a lot of technology that goes into it.
Reflecting on that, I guess for Qualcomm, that'd be, you can think about edge computing as a theme there. You could think about low latency 5G environments. Right. How do they manage that, where you've got literally like, 3 tons of something on a pallet, and if it drops, you're in trouble? Does it tend to be more around having localized AI edge image recognition, or is it more low latency networks, or a combination?
I would say you need both. The processing, a lot of it is being done on the in this case, not a robot, or either a robot or a forklift. There'll be a computer there. A lot of the AI processing will be done locally because the latency goes through the network's too high. But then also in warehouses, you may not have the perfect Wi-Fi coverage. So sometimes you can have private networks, whether it's 4G or 5G private networks that's in the warehouse, as it provides the coverage within the warehouse, so to provide the connectivity. So to the extent you need the connectivity, you use the leverage of the wireless network. To the extent you need the local processing that's happening on the robot itself, then you have the processing capabilities that's there to do the processing.
All right. Sounds like a very rich sort of vein. I can see why, for Qualcomm, it's a focus.
Yep.
Fantastic. So then, talking a little bit then about enterprise tech companies, both of you obviously do later stage investing as well. And I'm very curious to hear how both in the context of like a Qualcomm or a Box or an Apple where you were at previously, or even like a later stage sort of company that's heading towards an IPO, but it's at a scale where it has fairly well set architecture and processes. What do you see that companies in those sort of phases are doing to innovate? Like how do you keep, especially on the West Coast where it's incredibly, competition's intense, there's a lot of capital heading towards new themes. What have you seen companies do to sort of innovate on a continuous basis as they grow and they build up more tech debt and it becomes a little more sort of ossified? I don't know, any thoughts?
It's a great question and a very interesting way to think about things. I can say that when I was an executive at Box, it was something we intentionally carved out.
Okay.
We had a weekly meeting that was called the Big Ideas meeting, and it was composed of a group of about 8 of us, and we would invite people in as appropriate to join us. But the fundamental idea was, what is happening over the next 6 months that we could creatively address in new and innovative ideas? And so we would think about what were our upcoming product launches and what were our upcoming media opportunities or conferences, and how could we think differently about what we were bringing to the table. What companies were we seeing across the spectrum that were doing things similar or different to what we were doing that we could incorporate into our thinking? But it was a free range room, meaning that no idea was bad, every idea was worth exploring, and it gave the group of people in the room the freedom to be bold and to think outside of the box, so to speak, and really be creative. And it was extremely important as we grew in scale to keep that philosophy in mind, that innovation was going to drive the success of the company. And I think that that's something, it's just one idea, but there's lots of different ways. But I do think that it has to be something that leaders consciously invest in and allow for lots of brainstorming and free thinking to occur to get to new and innovative ideas.
So it has to be some sort of a mechanism or something.
I think it has to be mindful, yes.
And that session, I'm curious, did that happen, I mean, you were part of the executive team there, so was it at the executive team level or was it in the product?
It was composed of a cross-functional team. It wasn't just executives. So we'd have people from the product team and people from the communications team, and yes, many were senior, but often when we were exploring new ideas, we would bring in the right person, regardless of level, into the room to be part of the conversation.
Right. How about, from your observations again, it's kind of harder to have crazy ideas when you need to build things that work globally. You kind of have a CDMA network that kind of works on the edge. So I'm just curious, as you think about then sort of hardware and sort of deep tech where you don't have that necessarily fallback to sort of, you don't want to fail fast when you're dealing with mobile phones, for example. I'm just curious, how do you manage that process of innovation in that kind of a context?
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think this is true for all tech companies, right? Whether you're a big company, you're startups, you have to keep innovating. Right? We've developed 3G technologies, then there's 4G, then there's 5G, now we're working on 6G technologies. So you don't have any choice. The competition is fierce. You have to stay on top of your game and really figure out what's the core of the technology you have as a company. For us is communications, for us is low power, high performance processor or compute technologies. So we have to keep iterating and build the best technology that we can. Otherwise, we as a company will get left behind. There's no other way around it. So you have to stay abreast of what's happening in the ecosystem. You have to get ahead of your competition, so you have to invest a lot in R&D resources. You have to do these brainstorm sessions. You have to understand what other companies are doing around the ecosystem and really, really stay on top of the game. And the function we do as a ventures group is to help the company understand what are some of the other innovations that's outside of Qualcomm, right? We're heads down building our own technology, but other companies doing other things. You saw a chart on how fast OpenAI got accelerated. So we really have to stay on top of what's happening outside the company. What are the new innovations that are happening in Silicon Valley, in Japan, other parts of the world, and bring those insights back to the company. Say, hey, these are other innovations that's happening around our ecosystem. We really need to pay attention to this. Some companies we may decide to invest, create a partnership with, and sometimes maybe a company we say, hey, this company got technology maybe we can use ourselves. So then it becomes an M&A discussion that we may want to acquire that company. So we serve as kind of the sensors, as the front of the lines, trying to see what innovations that are being developed outside of our company, and to help bring some of that innovation insights back to the corporation.
Right. So what you're saying triggers a thought, just in a little bit of market context of Japan. In Japan, corporate venture capital is a very significant part of the ecosystem. I think as a percentage relative to the US, it's even higher than you'd see in the US. So I'm sure there's many members of the audience who are in roles related to that. You talked a little bit about Qualcomm Ventures and then Qualcomm per se. How does that relationship work? I'd love to hear more about, like, do you have your own antenna and you're sort of self-guided, or do you have like a mandate from Qualcomm per se? And then as you engage and make decisions between investing in M&A, how does that process work?
Yeah, so we're trying to balance two things because we're investing money, so we have to generate a return for the corporation. We're deploying the company's capital. At the same time, we also serve a strategic function. As I mentioned, one is the insight that we gain from interacting with startup in the ecosystem, whether it's in the Valley or other parts of the world. And then the other thing we do is we collaborate with the different business units. So we have regular interactions with the general managers for the respective business units, so whether it's automotive or smartphones or IoT, trying to understand what technology they're looking for, what are the gaps that we have, what things they'd be interested in seeing. So then we're trying to bring the relevant insights or maybe the relevant startups in front of them, and maybe create some of those meetings, at least educate them on what's happening outside of Qualcomm. And then hopefully, as a result, some companies will end up investing, some companies we may end up doing a business partnership, and some we may end up acquiring.
Right. Sounds like a very, sort of a well thought through model, and plenty to learn there.
And we do something that is, it's very parallel, but I think also very uniquely differentiating for B Capital in the venture community is that we've established hundreds of relationships with folks inside corporations who are running corporate innovation teams.
Oh, okay.
And we get together with those.
You've got the relationship with the consultant. Okay.
Exactly. So we get together with leaders of these corporate functions responsible for innovation and understand from them what their quarterly or annual drivers are. So what's important to these organizations? And then we're able to go back to our founders to share some of those insights and knowledge and make introductions as appropriate. So understanding what corporate entities are striving for over the next quarter or year, and then matching them with some of the portfolio company technologies that we're seeing.
Okay, that'd be an incredible source of insight for the startups you're investing in as well, because you can sort of tell them live what they should be.
It gives us a finger on the pulse,
Within that, just curious, and I'm going to say the word AI again, but if you think about the past, I don't know, sort of 3 or 4 years, it has indeed been a very tumultuous time. You've had COVID, you've had both supply and demand shocks over that time frame. As you've sort of observed those conversations with the corporate, the open innovation people, has there been big shifts? For example, as OpenAI has come on board, have you seen a big shift in what they're asking for and looking for? Or has it been sort of consistent needs and just a different technology to answer it?
Well, it certainly is on the tip of everyone's tongue. Everyone on the corporate side and on the startup side, everyone's trying to understand what AI how it will impact their business, what they need to be doing to adapt and adopt these new technologies. So certainly corporate innovation teams are at the top of the list. I think one of the interesting things that we'll see over the coming months and years will be what corporations decide to build themselves versus what technologies they decide to partner with or to purchase. And I think that's really what we're watching very closely as a fund. And I'm sure, Quinn, you probably are too, right? Where will these technologies drive us? What will we build? What will we buy? Who will we partner with? to drive internal change in our organizations to take advantage of these new insights that are available.
Right. Because Quinn, I recall you mentioned in a previous conversation that you'd actually, as Qualcomm, you'd made the choice to do some tooling and data sort of analytics internally. I think for the customer support function. Did you actually, because of the proprietary nature of the data, you sort of brought that in-house.
Right.
So how have you sort of observed that dynamic that Karen's mentioning around sort of build versus sort of buy or outsource?
So ultimately, I think there's two factors. One is we can't always build, but there are startups are moving much faster than us maybe can build it. That's one thing. The performance of the stuff we built has to be as good as outside, right? So we'll have to evaluate what we build versus what other people are developing. And there's other things out there, open source models that we can leverage as well, that to figure out, okay, so we could use what we build, we can leverage a third party, and then it comes down to the cost question. If we have to license something from a third party or pay somebody X millions of dollars to use their tech versus cost us however much to build it, what's the trade-off?
I think another trade-off there also is maintaining your corporate infrastructure and the security required, because you have so many corporate secrets, things that you don't want to slip out, so you have to be extra. There's a whole nother layer.
Absolutely.
Around purchasing and execution around that, because you have so much to be careful of. And I think that's another thing that early stage startups need to understand and consider, is how to build the security layer so tightly that even companies as large as Qualcomm are able to adopt.
You get comfortable with that adoption.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the data we have are very, actually proprietary or IP rich, right? We really don't want that.
To say the least of it, yeah.
Yeah.
You can imagine chip designs.
Yeah, exactly. So whatever system, whether it's third-party system we use and our own, it really needs to sit behind the corporate firewall. To your question about security, the data has to be very safeguarded and protected. So either we use a third-party system that has to go through rigorous audit processes and make sure that their system works properly and no data gets leaked outside. So a lot of these things that becomes all, so from a startup standpoint, when they develop new tech selling into the enterprise, to your point, they really need to take some of that into consideration.
Right, so just adding to the, if you think about the things that a tech leader has to think about today, you've got, we've talked about security, we've talked about diversity, we've talked about, global adaptability, like there's a lot to think about.
There is.
Security is something that both of you sort of referenced. I'm curious, in terms as an investment theme, are there sort of, do you see much in the way of sort of cybersecurity startups or, communication security, like firewall technology? Do you see a sort of a surge in that space, or is it still, at the same sort of burn you've seen historically?
I would say 1,000%. It's something that is very top of mind, protecting IP, protecting corporate secrets, while still having the mandate of building sustainable platforms and providing your end users with the tools they need to do the work that they need to do. It's another layer that has to be considered. I think extremely complicated. We look at these firms very closely, and we have invested in many security-driven companies. I have one in my portfolio called Satori Cyber that helps.
Oh, yep.
Do you know Satori? They help mask user information so that anyone in an organization who needs to access particular information gets the right clearances that they need, so that they're protecting against all of the compliance and regulatory needs of the company. So I think we're going to see massive explosion in not only the requirements, but as we get more clear on the implications of AI and new technologies, what that means for the corporate environment and keeping the data and the people safe.
Yeah. Indeed.
Just one maybe add to what Karen mentioned. So if you think about AI, we're still in early innings of Gen AI, right? The attackers, or the ones that's in the cybersecurity area, they also have access to these technologies, right? So they're getting smarter too.
A whole bunch of tools to play with.
Leveraging AI, right? So their game's up. So as a corporation, for us to, our CISO has to protect our data, our corporation, they have to take into account what the attackers or new technology they're using. to become much more sophisticated, to make it look like, they sometimes come to the corporation pretending it's somebody, right?
Social engineering.
Yeah, phishing, et cetera, all sorts of things, yeah.
Yeah.
So you just have to, this is a constant, thing that you have to, and then there's startups coming up with new technology to protect against the new threats, if you will, right? So it's a evolving, I think, a very dynamic ecosystem, and a lot of interesting companies will be founded and will be very successful.
Investment, isn't it?
Yes.
And so multifaceted. So, as you've both been discussing, there is just so much for the leader of an enterprise tech company to think about today. Just curious to get your thoughts on it. If you reflect on the founders you work with, and you could pick one founder or you could just think about their overall, but just love to hear your thoughts on what are the sort of skills or characteristics of like an enterprise tech founder that you think are going to be particularly critical going forward?
Happy to jump in.
Go ahead.
Sure. We are fundamentally about the people. We want to understand the founder, their founder journey, their story, why they're passionate about what they're building, and how resilient they are in their thinking. And so that's definitely part of our investment process, is wanting to see what that founding team believes they're capable of building, why they're committed to it, how they've gotten to where they are today, and what's going to take them to the heights of the journey that they're on. And so we do spend a lot of time on the people equation. We call it rocket people, rocket ship with the company. Rocket people, rocket ship. We want to look for people that are building rocket ships. So they ideally will have the characteristics that I've mentioned. So the people becomes one of the primary areas that we focus on, as well as, of course, the technology and the market and the efficiency and the growth. But I think at the end of the day, we're looking for great stories, great people, and founders that have both the resilience and the commitment to build a sustainable company.
Fascinating. There's an investor that I've worked with who uses what he calls the pulse check. So at the start of the meeting and at the end of the meeting, has your pulse gone up or down? So awesome. This notion of a rocket awesome. People really does resonate.
I couldn't agree more with Karen's. At the end of the day, the venture business, we're investing in people. So the team becomes extremely important, the founder, the CEO, the entrepreneur. One of the things I've observed over the years, really like people with good product vision. So if you even look at big successful tech companies, Mark Zuckerberg, Amazon, the CEOs, the founders have very, very clear visions of what they want to build, and then be able to really, and also the ability to attract talent and build a team to go with them to build the product. We invested in Zoom, Eric.
Talk about visionary.
Very visionary founder. He wanted to build a better collaboration platform that he couldn't do in his prior company. So he came out, started this thing. I want to build the best product, the easiest to use, and he's focused, very, very, very customer-centric focus. He would reply to customer emails directly himself. It's probably early days. I don't know if he does that today anymore. But the focus on customer, the focus on building the best product, and has a clear vision of what he wants to build as a company, I think those tend to be successful founder CEOs.
Great. So then looking forward a little bit, both of you are sort of investing at the very sort of front edge, if you will, of technology in Silicon Valley. Just curious, what are the sort of 2 or 3 investment themes more recently that you're looking carefully at that you're excited about?
We're pretty excited about Gen AI, but a lot of people are excited about Gen AI. The challenge is there's still a lot of capital out there. The valuation, if you will, of some of the early stage Gen AI companies, it's still pretty rich, in our opinion. And then also some of the companies develop foundation models require a lot of capital to buy GPUs and so forth to train. So a lot of these businesses actually are fairly capital intensive as well. So we're excited about the Gen AI space. I think there's a lot of interesting use cases, applications of Gen AI in enterprise and other areas. You talked about legal, I think, right? Healthcare, another area. We invested in a company, pretty early stage company that's helping the software development side of things called Tap9. But I think there's a variety of interesting use cases that will come up, and that's still, I think, still early days in Gen AI. So a lot of excitement, and I think a lot of opportunities we're pretty excited about.
Fantastic. Karen?
I think we're still in the very early days of digital transformation, and there's a lot more to do. It's certainly seeing technologies like Gen AI come along, that will be another driver. So we've talked about a lot of different transformational areas, data security, digital transformation, Gen AI. Those are all areas that we're deeply focused on as well. I also spend a lot of time in the healthcare space where, particularly in the US, there's such dysfunction and such opportunity for technology to transform the way that we treat and care for people, that I think there's just a ton of opportunity there. I spent a lot of time thinking about what could be done to modify existing systems so that we can transform healthcare and access to care. We're seeing a lot of specialty practice areas like cardiology and dementia care where patients are waiting for months and months to get the care that we need. How can we cut that time in half by providing access to the best care possible in as short a time possible? So those are some of the areas that I think about, but there's a ton of growth. You could focus on any one of those and make a career of it. So there's plenty of room for growth in the transformation that we're seeing in technology driving businesses today.
Yeah, it's one thing that never ceases to amaze me is, I think, Karen, you mentioned it, was it 3.7 trillion global? 3.7 trillion. So that's sort of a little bit too big to sort of imagine, if you will. Yeah. And it's growing at 7%, which means it's still doubling every decade. And there's a lot of geographies like Japan where it's still growing so rapidly. It's just striking how, I think people make the base assumption that if it's big, it's going to grow slow. But I think people just completely underestimate the sheer upside there is out there from enterprise tech still. It's such a massive, massive space. Just in closing then, coming back a little bit to Japan, I think, Karen, you mentioned earlier that you had a bit of a look at Japan's startup development 5-year plan, and you thought there was a lot to like about that particular.
Absolutely. I was very impressed by the vision, and I think some of the fundamental components of the growth plan were right on. The idea that we can learn so much from other successful ecosystems is an important consideration. You know, clearly there are, across all of the ecosystem environments, there are cultural differences, and the U.S. is well known for for being brash and growth oriented and having a growth mindset, and there's some things to learn from that, and there's also some things that we could be better at, but decision making and investment mentality. Of course, every startup needs access to capital. What's the best way to begin the fundraising journey? Do you start with local investors, or do you seek out global investors from day one? So there's lots of areas, but I really was very impressed by the ideas that were presented in that development plan.
Fantastic. Well, we've been on a little bit of a journey across an extremely broad range of topics, going from tech, leadership, themes. We had to talk about AI, and I think you did a wonderful job of synthesizing that for us. And I'm sure there's a lot to take home in terms of hints. I think this question around university engagement as part of the ecosystem is a really interesting one. Quinn, the way you were talking about how real world sort of supply chains and warehousing, et cetera, is a massive theme that hasn't been fully accessed, are all great thought for us to take home. So I'd like to thank you, Karen, and thank you, Quinn, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.